Welcome to Soul Elevation, guiding your ascension to new heights. I'm your host, Kara Goodwin. I'm so excited about this amazing episode with Cynthia Sue Larson, where we talk about parallel realities, quantum jumping, and the Mandela Effect. Cynthia has such a gift in making complex topics in the groundbreaking field of quantum science digestible and understandable. And in this episode, she gives fascinating and provocative insights through her own personal experiences of shifting reality. And I share a little bit toward the end about my own activations through engaging with her work. Cynthia Sue Larson is the best-selling author of several books, including The Mandela Effect and Its Society, Quantum Jumps, Reality Shifts, and High Energy Money. Cynthia has a degree in physics from UC Berkeley, an MBA, a Doctor of Divinity, and a second-degree black belt. Cynthia is founder of Reality Shifters, first president of the International Mandela Effect Conference, managing director of Foundations of Mind, and creator and host of Living the Quantum Dream podcast. And she's been featured in numerous shows, including Gaia, the History Channel, Coast to Coast AM, and the BBC. Cynthia reminds us to ask in every situation, how good can it get? So we'll get into this amazing episode in just a moment, but first, I'm so excited to share about my book, Your Authentic Awakening, A Guide to Everyday Spiritual Living, which will be available this spring. This book is designed to help you reach new heights of spiritual awakening. It's full of spiritual guidance, practical tools, and captivating personal stories, all working together to expand your consciousness and open your heart. Find out more on karagoodwin.com, including how to get your own signed copy. And now, enjoy this episode. Well, welcome, Cynthia. I'm so excited to have you here today. Thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thank you, Kara, for inviting me. And I just love talking about these topics. And we had some emails back and forth that showed there's a lot to talk about here.
Yes. Your book. So I've read a couple of your books here. I've got Quantum Jumps here with me.
Yes.
And then I've got Reality Shifters upstairs, and I've read the Mandela Effect one as well. And they're so activating. And what is so fun is reading, the Mandela Effect, for example, your work on the Mandela Effect, and then experiencing all these synchronicities that have happened. And I'll go into those if we get time, but super fun. And I implore people to look into your work and then just notice what happens, because it's like it opens up things within the mind to allow the experience, like more quantum experiences. So what a gift. That's amazing.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad you find it a gift, and I'm glad you got activated and in good ways. So
yes, absolutely. So let's start by talking about your background and how you got into doing this type of quantum research.
Well, it's a long story. I think it's sort of the fabric of who I am is why I'm doing this work. So I was lucky to have a family that was supportive of following my dream. I think my parents really respect that. And even though what I'm doing is rather different than what a lot of people might find normal, and my family was very supportive of the sciences. So I had a good start with parents that appreciated education. So I studied physics at UC Berkeley. And that, of course, based on my ability I'm sort of a mystic at heart. And so when I studied quantum physics, I noticed that it's very receptive to observation, not just the way they describe it, but the way I was interacting with it in college. I could actually just ask, like, what's the answer to this quantum physics problem, and feel and know an answer to it. So maybe that was a unique experience on my part. I don't know. But it showed me this is quite activating and quite real. And in more recent years, when I started noticing that reality does change, it does shift when I believe it's because of us as pure consciousness observing. So when consciousness itself, that's us, changes the physical world, that's when we notice things appearing, disappearing, transforming, and transporting. So that was my original foray into this whole area, and recognizing I needed to start sharing information. Back in the 1990s, that's when I had the first edition of my book, Reality Shifts, came out as a spiral-bound notebook, and I would teach workshops about that. small ones. Because back at that time, there wasn't that much information really. The internet was brand new. There weren't really websites to share information. So it wasn't really a possibility for something like a collective alternate memory experience, such as the Mandela Effect. I don't think that could have come out until the 2000s, when the ubiquitousness of the internets and social media made it possible for people to share online. Wait a minute, I remember things differently. And that's when I think I want to do the shout out to Art Bell that I make in my book, because he really, I believe, was the first one to get flooded with notifications that Nelson Mandela was, he had died as people remembered it, but then suddenly, mysteriously, he's alive again. What happened? And so that was, even though Art Bell got those phone calls and got those faxes, he didn't really popularize the term Mandela Effect. That credit is given to Fiona Broome, who just happens to be the one who gave it that wonderful name. But I'd been tracking this phenomenon most of my life as a child in the 60s and 70s, noticing these reality shifts, and finally writing about them myself after a Kundalini awakening that I experienced in the 1990s. So I think all these things matter, as well as other stuff, but I know we just have a short time, so I'm kind of giving a very compact introduction.
Right, but it was really concise. And what I appreciate so much with your work, if somebody's listening and they might think like, oh, quantum science, like this is not relevant to me. I'm a spiritual seeker. I don't care about physics, it's in the sciences. That it's such an interesting intersection, because like you say, it's all around consciousness, and it's seeing how we're all connected and how there's not one absolute reality, and you can't take the observer out of it. So just by even if we don't feel like we're participating in something, just because we notice it, we change it. And that's phenomenal. I've always understood reality to be fixed, and that, I'm just witnessing this objectively,
right.
unless I'm actually personally interacting with something. But let's step back a little bit with the Mandela Effect, because that might be a new term for people. And you've kind of explained it's around different memories of things, but let's talk about what the Mandela Effect is. And then in your book, you give some really fascinating examples of how which blew my mind, because I was born in the 70s and there were so many things that I grew up with. Like I feel in my bones is what I experienced as a child. And then I'm reading your book and I'm like, what? And looking on the internet, and that's not what it was. How is this possible? So let's start by what it is.
Okay, so I mentioned briefly in the preamble that collective alternate memories would be my preferred way to describe the so-called Mandela Effect. So it's something that we notice that there could be a group of people that are collectively remembering, as with Nelson Mandela. Didn't he die in the 1980s? It would be what Fiona Broome was noticing at that Dragon Con conference. And other people agreed, like, yeah, I think he did. Well, wait a minute. Now he became president of South Africa. So he obviously didn't die in the 1980s, because he's still with us, thank goodness. And so that's one big example. Now, I'll get in my book, of course, I described why it is that a lot of people, especially residents of South Africa, would not notice this. And it's a very clear aspect of the quantum aspect of this whole phenomenon. Basically, I'll just say what it is. It's quantum Zeno effect. So it's like the watched pot never boils. If you happen to live in a place where you're constantly observing what's going on, you won't be as likely to notice it's like a timeline jump or a timeline shift. As much as you would if you look away, look back, like those of us who don't live in South Africa. And so it's not on our mind each and every day, like who's the president of South Africa. So that's why. Now, for a lot of people, big changes would involve internationally, things like movies, like Snow White has a very famous, that's a cartoon that Disney popularized. There's a story where the witch is looking in a mirror and she says something mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all. And I think I'm mentioning this one because it's a big one internationally. So wherever people are in the world, they've probably heard this. And so I don't know about you, but I remember mirror, mirror on the wall. Who's the
Mirror,
fairest
mirror.
of them all? Yeah.
Yes.
And it shows up in lots of things that indicate lots of other people remember that too. Like ad campaigns will pick up mirror, mirror on the wall. Now the Disney movie has never had it be mirror, mirror on the wall. It's only ever been magic mirror on the wall. Who's the fairest of them all? And people might say, well, that's not that big a deal. So then we can look at other things that affect everybody. And some of the big ones there would be physiology, anatomy inside our bodies. So the heart used to be farther to the left than it is now. I guess it's still slightly to the left. Some people notice it seems like it's on the move. Very funny part of this whole phenomenon. But anyway, back decades ago, I remember having seen, and I was recently reminded of, targets that people would put on fencing dummies, for example. So if you're learning to fence with something that looks like a wavery sword thing, and you're wearing the little mask over the face and the little white combat suit, and you're dancing around with your fencing apparatus, you'd be aiming for the heart on the target dummy. The heart was placed obviously to the left, just like some shooting ranges also had the heart to the left. Now the heart, as I was mentioning, is much closer to the center. It's still slightly to the left, but not very much. And so that's one big change that a lot of people notice. Some people have memories of going to get blood pressure taken and being told it's more accurate if we take into account the fact that the heart is closer to the left arm. So we're going to get a stronger reading on that arm and so forth. Now that doesn't make any sense.
Too, in middle school or in elementary school, we had to do the Pledge of Allegiance. So you stand up, can't remember if it was every morning or Monday mornings or whatever, put your hand over your heart, and it was the upper right quadrant of the chest. Like I remember this so vividly. You wouldn't put it in the center of the body, and it was very deliberate. Put it over your heart.
Yeah, we'd use our right hand and which it might naturally fall on the left side, and the teachers would indicate, like you're suggesting, they'd be really taking the teaching moment that the heart is slightly to the left of center. So put your right hand over a little bit to the left, not in the center, but a little to the left. And You're right, now it's different. So that's a big one. Kidneys have also moved. If you remember the kidney punch from martial arts and boxing, that would be a very specific location. It's also the same place. If you protect your kidneys, putting your hands behind the lower back is where most of us remember. That's where they used to be. They've moved up under the relative safety of the rib cage, so they're much higher than they used to be. They're still, to the degree that some people going for surgery notice that the surgery changed. The doctor used to enter through the back, and now it's through the front because the rib cage is totally in the way. It's just weird. Things that you wouldn't expect would change are very different. Maybe I don't know exactly how they do the surgery, but I did hear from a woman who told me that changed for her, that she had always gone to have her kidneys checked, to do updates. I guess she had a kidney situation going on. So instead of being easier to access when they're down lower, they've moved up, so it made it trickier. So that was the same week that she came to hear me talk about that, and she was just blown away. Like, wait a minute, this is crazy. I thought I just misremembered something. It was so weird when I went to the doctor this last week. So very strange.
Wow. Yeah. So we have these anatomical ones, and we're not talking about the evolution of our species. This is happening in very short order, like within, a lifetime.
Right. Right. And then geography changes. People notice things. Again, it's not going to be so strong right where you live, but if you don't live too close to the Straits of Gibraltar, for example, then some of us remember straits made sense because Gibraltar was an island. Now it's not an island. It's sort of a peninsula. It made a whole bunch of things hit differently when you look at the geography it seems like it changed. And then people notice strange things with Sicily seeming a lot bigger these days, being slightly differently located. New Zealand seems to scoot all around Australia. So, but again, if you don't live in New Zealand, I would expect if you live in New Zealand, it's like, no, it doesn't move. Sure, fair enough. But for a lot of the rest of us, it does. And then even the location in the Milky Way, that seems to have changed. A lot of people remember Carl Sagan pointing at a point on the map of the galaxy showing, that we are right here in the far, far outer reaches. Now it seems like we're moving much more towards center. So very interesting. So in other words, everything's fair game. I'm not mentioning yet the big ones that people talk about with Berenstain Bears and Berenstain and products like Jiffy peanut butter that we remember, but it's only ever been Jif. And Berenstain or Steen Bears has only been Berenstain. So some of these things are very odd. And then all the movie dialogue, so many things in movies have changed from what we clearly remember. Songs have changed, paintings have changed, art has changed, and sculptures and statues have changed. So it's almost like there's no area that isn't affected, basically, by these changes that we're noticing.
Right. And another interesting thing with this whole phenomenon is, a lot of the things that you say where it's like, no, it's not Berenstain. It's obviously Berenstain. Like, I remember that so clearly. I know that the Fruit of the Loom, logo had a cornucopia, and it apparently never has had it. But not everybody remembers it the same way. So this is another aspect of the phenomenon where some people are really adamant. So one for me is Fruit Loops. So there are people who are shocked that it's FROOT, loops. And I distinctly remember at one point, I think I was in middle school, and I looked at the cereal box and I was surprised that they spelled it that way, because I had seen Fruit Loops my whole life and never noticed that they didn't spell it FRUIT. So that's one where I'm like, no, I know it's always been, well, at least from that point forward, from when I was,
Right.
a teenager forward. But again, I was surprised when I noticed it, but I figured it was an oversight. Like, oh, I just never looked at it closely,
Right.
And that's what I think some people who have a hard time accepting that this is a possibility, that there are changes, that, that history is changing right in front of our eyes. They're saying that, no, I don't remember it that way, or I'm willing to just accept that I misremember, I didn't remember it correctly, and it must have always been this way. So, but there are, it's not like the whole population agrees that about the difference in history.
Yes, and I delve into that with the book about the Mandela Effect in society. I talk about, instead of the idea of solipsism from philosophy, where it's sort of like you're sort of falling into this thing of thinking that everything's kind of one way, and it's like sort of a logical error. We have much more of a Copernicanism, looks like it's going on. So there are many central points of consciousness. So we'll see the universe, the cosmos, from our perspective. So it looks like there may not be one consensus objective reality. Instead, it looks like there are a multitude of subjective realities, which means that the way that we see things totally matters. And that's where it starts getting spiritual, because that's what the great teachers and great spiritual leaders have been talking about. That's what the perennial philosophy is all about. As within, so without. It's when you're fear-based, you'll be almost attracting, like law of attraction. If you're fear-based, you'll be seeing the things you're afraid of. And if you're love-based and asking my favorite question, how good can it get? Then you'll be drawing things that you're much more likely to enjoy.
Well, while we're on the topic of the Mandela Effect, I was shocked by one particular story of the Black Tom explosions from prior to World War I. And the fact that this is not like something that we all know, like Hiroshima, for example.
Right. Yeah, like the question that you might be asked is, what was the first attack on American soil, right?
Right.
Okay, the first foreign attack on American soil. And I think I would have answered the way it sounds like you would have answered, saying, it would be, well, I don't know what you would say.
Pearl Harbor, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what I would have guessed. And we would both be wrong, according to history, the way it's always been. So I'm just putting that there for listeners to get that moment of what. Now, you gave a clue. You mentioned the Black Tom. But if people are like us, they probably never heard of the Black Tom explosions. I know I never did. until recently. So go ahead. I didn't mean to get so excited.
No. No, it was just a lead in to, I mean,
Yes.
I don't, and you can share a little bit about what the Black Tom explosions were, but this is another like mind blowing aspect of how, this, if I had learned this in school, I would have thought it would just have been a major thing that was common knowledge.
Yes. That's what I would think too. These explosions were basically, there's a whole bunch of aspects that are weird about this story. Like you said, it happened a long time ago. So it was an early attack on U.S. soil, which kind of ended up, I think it was by some saboteurs. I guess they were Germans in America, setting off explosives that damaged, and they ended up being triggered in such a huge boom explosion that was heard through nearby New York City and all across, I guess, New Jersey, and it actually damaged the Statue of Liberty. Now that's this whole thing is starting to get like, wait a minute, what? Wait, what? Wait, what?
Right.
It gets
Yeah.
weirder and weirder. Like, you've got to be kidding me. Something damaged the Statue of Liberty? And that never, I mean, all of these are quite newsworthy in and of themselves. First attack on U.S. soil, something like a boom that just shook buildings, like there was an earthquake, and it was felt in New York and all across the eastern seaboard. But this thing damaging the Statue of Liberty, right there, I'm thinking, okay, we would have heard about this. I would think it should have been in the history books. Like, and of course, America got involved because there'd been that Black Tom explosion, so, and it stepped up security on the east coast of America, which I may have been a bit lax. I don't know how the whole thing happened, but it seems like the history is completely missing. I never learned that history in school, so it sounds like
Right.
you didn't either.
No, no. It's really, really fascinating, the whole concept. And we've been talking about the collective Mandela effects, but then there are personal ones where people have, maybe we think of them as glitches in the matrix, or, where we suddenly notice something and then it's gone again, and then we notice it again. And you have some great examples of this in your book, but can you talk a little bit about how we can have our own personal Mandela effects?
Absolutely. This is what I was calling reality shifts, and came to find out, oh, good, somebody else called it that too. And so, shout out to PMH Atwater, who wrote a book, Future Memory. Chapter 2 is all about reality shifts. So these are what I was calling reality shifts, and I think that's a perfectly valid name for it, because it seems like you'll just be in your house, and maybe one day you'll notice a light switch or a faucet or something operates differently. For me, it was a clothes timer dial. So I had, how you build up muscle memory, motor memory? So if you do a certain repetitive action hundreds, if not thousands of times, that it's just weird if suddenly you can't do that action anymore because the device is no longer where your body thinks it should be. To me, that's one of the strongest indicators something has changed. Something big has changed. So it's not just you being forgetful, but I've had that happen. In my book, Reality Shifts, I talk about locking the doors on my car, and then they would come unlocked and then be locked. It was just weird. Nobody's tampering with it. This was a very old car it was like a 1980s car, so it did not have automatic door locks. There was no button that would make them pop up. And so that was very strange. And then in the same book, Reality Shifts, I described a bird feeder that had been, changing between empty and full. And there's no way birds could be refilling the feeder, or, the whole thing was like, what the heck? So those are big ones. I've had so many personal ones. I've had downright miraculous shifts that have happened to me, like experiencing a flat tire while driving and feeling so many symptoms of the flat tire experience. I knew which tire it was, because not only did I hear it went pow, kind of a bang sound, but then the steering wheel pulled in the dead tire direction, the right front tire, and it was going thwop, 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 and I could hear it when I rolled the windows down from the right front. I'm saying all this because I could hardly believe what happened next. So I was going to be late. At the time, I was asking, just sort of in a meditative state, how good can it get? How good can it get? And then pow, thwop, thwop, thwop. I'm like,
It could definitely get better.
this is so funny. So, but I'm a good-hearted person. I'm like, okay, well, maybe late to my appointment. This is not cool, but okay. I'll keep asking, how good can it get? Park the car, get out of the car, go take a look at this. I do have a spare tire in the back, but I'm going to get, now I'm just resigned to the fact I'm going to get dirty. I'll be greasy. I can't drive on a flat tire. So I'll be late. Everything, like, okay, fine. I accept all that. But then I go and look at this situation and the tire looks fine. So I just kicked it. Like, now I know why people kick tires. Like, what am I going to do? I go sit back down in the driver's seat and I think, I can't drive this car. It's got a flat tire. So I get back out and inspect it a second time because I just can't believe my eyes or my foot, feels fine, looks fine. I think, well, now what do I do? It was confusing. I thought, well, I'll drive slowly. And if I hear it go thwop, thwop, then obviously I just missed something. I'll pull over again. So I'm listening intently. There's no more thwop, thwop. There's no pulling to the right. So I get to where I'm going. I get out, look at the tire. It's fine. I come back home, look at the tire. It's fine. I'm really confused. So I asked my husband, could you please, I don't tell him what happened. I just ask him, I think something's wrong with the tire pressure on the car. Could you check it, please? So after a while, he comes back in the house and says, well, it's a good thing you mentioned that 3 of those tires were low. And I said, 3 of the tires? What about the 4th? And he said, yeah, the front right tire was perfect. And I'm like, no.
Gosh.
How good can it get?
Wow. It's phenomenal. I mean, I have my own kind of glitches in the matrix that come to mind as I was reading your book. One being and both of them were kind of on the edge of sleep. So either coming out of sleep or kind of like being in and out of sleep. One of them was my cat jumped up on my bed, which is funny because of the scene in the Matrix with the glitch.
Yes.
Where the cat goes by twice from the same direction.
Right.
But my cat jumped up on the bed and woke me enough for me to feel her jump exactly the same way a second time, like within a couple of seconds. But it was like I woke up to her jumping on the bed and then felt her jump on the bed. And she hadn't jumped down and jumped back on. It was the exact same thing again.
Yes.
And so that was one. And another one was like, I can't even remember what happened. I had to get up and like turn a light off, but I had been asleep. And then I got up and hit the light switch. And I kind of woke up and was walking back to my bed. But it was a weird sensation of like, I'm not sure, like I know it was correct that I had to hit the light switch, or maybe I was turning a fan on or fan off or something. But it was like I just kind of woke up and was like, okay, I just turned that light switch and I'm walking now, but I don't really know how I got to the standing position. And that was a similar feeling of like, where was I? Why did my body move? But like I wasn't in there moving type of thing. But what is your theory about what happens in the case of like your tire, for example?
I'm sharing with you that was a mind blower even for me. I mean, I get weird stuff, but that was like, okay, that tops pretty much everything. But I've seen spontaneous remissions, what people would call miracles. And so my explanation for it is that it looks like literally we're capable of moving to an adjacent alternate, if you want to call it a timeline, or an adjacent alternate Wigner bubble. There's on the cover of the book, Mandela Effect and its Society, I've got these 2 spheres held in my hand, like 2 crystal balls, representative of 2 Wigner bubbles. I'm pronouncing it Wigner because Eugene Wigner, he spoke German. So basically he was the one who was saying, wouldn't it be interesting if there's a difference between an observer who's watching an experiment, like there's a scientist watching the scientist sort of thing. So one scientist is observing whether a cat inside of a sealed box is alive or dead. And I get into the physics of that in the book because that's an actual Schrodinger's cat experiment. People have heard of the Schrodinger's cat. Is it alive? Is it dead? In this, according to Erwin Schrödinger, it could be both. If it's connected to a quantum system, and that's where people thought, Erwin, you're crazy. how can a cat be dead and alive inside of the box? That's crazy. But Irwin said, that's the reason I'm saying this, because that's how quantum physics is behaving, as if until you observe it, the system is in a superposition of states. It's just as crazy as that. So he was making that point, and then upon opening the box, the system collapses into either the cat is alive, hopefully, or maybe dead, hopefully not. So, and then there's an observer of the first, like Erwin Schrödinger. So if Eugene Wigner is watching Erwin Schrödinger opening the box, Erwin was proposing a very interesting thought experiment. At the time he proposed it, there was no way to test it. And his thought experiment was, what if I, Erwin Schrödinger, or somebody else observes, Eugene Wigner observes Erwin Schrödinger. I know these names are German and they're confusing me. But if if you've got the two observers and one's closer to the cat and one's farther, what if they're getting two different observations? Is that possible? And Eugene was asking that kind of question the way physicists do, not to be a troublemaker, but to encourage investigation. In the year 2019, this is an experiment along the lines of this Wigner proposal was tested, and indeed the two observational devices at the same place at the same time did in fact observe two different things. So this is in keeping with the fact that it's possible for somebody to say, I remember Nelson Mandela dying in the 1980s. And of course, I, Cynthia, also remember, yes, he was president of South Africa. And so there's a duality. I can remember both realities, whereas someone that lived in South Africa perhaps might only remember one. And this is just at the heart of everything, is this basic intrinsic subjectivity, which is that Copernicanism that's at the heart of reality itself. So it doesn't look like there's only one fixed reality. This is good news if you believe in miracles. That means you can get a very terrible diagnosis from a doctor and feel like, that's okay. I remember that quantum jumps and reality shifts are possible. Miracles happen. So I'm going to stay positive anyway. And I think people that do stay positive, there's been a lot of evidence, as I share in my book, Quantum Jumps, that they experience really good results. People who have a sense of faith tend to do better with the placebo effect, for example. So that's indicating you get miracles if you believe in miracles. So it's very interesting.
It definitely is. And that's one of the interesting things, too, with your books, is that there are practical, you give practical exercises on how people can tune into this more as more than an observer,
Yes.
within their own lives.
Yeah. Because the observer is interesting, and there's a power to observation, as I just suggested. The observer itself is a very key role. And so part of being active in your life is to start observing yourself from a higher vantage point. So even just a simple meditation or a simple one exercise I have in the book, The Mandela Effect and its Society, is something called Iliism. And it's sort of an idea, I think it came from philosophy originally, that it's a psychological practice, but you can talk about yourself in third person. Like today, Cynthia woke up, and right when she was waking up, she started the day by thinking, how good can it get? Just remembering to do that first thing, because it does make a big difference. And then sort of checked in, like, what's happening today? Sort of review. So I'm talking about Cynthia. So if I was journaling, I might journal myself that way. And you might think, okay, what's the difference there? Big difference. Because if I'm talking about Cynthia in third person while journaling, I wouldn't recommend doing this with your friends or your family. It starts sounding like, what? It's more something to do with your private thoughts. The goal is to step back and practice noticing and observing that there are levels of conscious agency to you. And this ultimately gets into some of the deep, like, Buddhist practices of, like, the Diamond Sutra, where, I mean, that would be the end point for this kind of a thing, where you just keep jumping back until it's almost like, who are you? And you're no longer a lifetime, a body, or a being. That's pretty fancy stuff. But in my book, I keep it really simple. Just talk about yourself third person, get one step above, so you can sort of see yourself as the actor on the stage of life and the observer both. So you're claiming the observational role by the meditative practice, and something as simple as just thinking of yourself occasionally as third person. Like I, Kara, woke up and I noticed my body was already moving around. That's weird. So, or Kara noticed her body was already moving around. So you'd be doing it that way, and you might get some additional insights into what was going on in that moment.
Mm.
It can definitely bring you closer to the state of consciousness that was involved at the time that particular experience happened.
Wow. And all of this is kind of begging the conversation about parallel realities and the idea that we have one reality that we're aware of in our human consciousness, but there are other kind of versions that come from choice points that we've made where we feel that we've made a choice, but really we've both have happened. Can you talk a little bit about timelines? And I also I've heard you talk about pruning the lower alternative realities. And I think that's really important too. So I want to be sure to get to that. But let's kind of start with just the concept of parallel timelines.
Yeah, I'll just share a story from inside Mandela Effect and its society, because I love this one with Carl Jung. I think people know Carl Jung. He's a famous psychologist. So I think he had I think it qualifies as a Mandela Effect, a personal one, but he was with his friend Toni Wolff, and she was there with him when they visited Ravenna, Italy. They were going to look at the baptistry of Ravenna, and they arrived in an octagonal kind of a room with soft blue lighting and beautiful, huge, unforgettable mosaics depicting scenes from Christianity and biblical scenes like Moses crossing the Red Sea and the baptism of I think John the Baptist. And then there was a scene with Jesus. So there were all these very spiritual scenes, and Carl Jung was talking to his friend Toni Wolff about them. He was just entranced, and so he was talking out loud as he was noticing the symbology and how each of these scenes depicted water. That seemed really important. He's noticing, look, there's water, 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 and the light's kind of blue in here, and he was just so amazed. So he and Toni both remembered this quite clearly. And then when they returned back home, I think he mentioned to some friends that were going to Italy, like, hey, you might want to check out that baptistry in Ravenna. And when you're there, could you pick up a postcard? I neglected to do that. And those mosaics are incredible. They're 6 by 8 feet big. They're huge. They're meaningful. They're profound. I just was so affected by them. I love them. But I didn't think to have a postcard to remember them by. So the friends were confused when they arrived in Ravenna and said, there's no postcard. There aren't none of these mosaics you're talking about. And so that's the point where I think Carl was checking with his friend Toni Wolff, like, you remember that, right? And she said, yes, you talked like 20 minutes about these things. You were just blown away by them, as was I. So, yeah, of course. So this, I'm mentioning this as such a powerful example, and I love it because it was in the 1930s. So I think the Mandela Effect goes back farther than the internet, is my point. Okay, so anyway, so Carl Jung was just amazed by this whole thing, and he's witnessing something which to him reminds him of some of the ideas he then talked about. So of course he sees it from a Carl Jungian perspective. I know if he heard about the Mandela Effect, he'd have some amazing things to say right now. But let's look at his experience from that timeline, sort of like decision point thing. What was going on with that? I consider Carl Jung to be a psychonaut who didn't need drugs. He was checking out consciousness itself, like I like to do. I don't need drugs either. And so for those of us who love that sort of thing, we're going to experience weird stuff. Like Carl Jung is the father of the word synchronicity, because he was noticing weird stuff, like really weird. And so this would be right up there, right up his alley. And I do notice a connection with these timeline changes and the choices we make and our levels of conscious agency and observational awareness. So I think Carl Jung, if he was alive today, he'd agree with me. Yeah, this is definitely indicative of different levels of consciousness. And I think Carl would agree that he had that desire, like I do, to know the true nature of consciousness. I know he was on that path. So I think he would agree, like, yeah, so that's a decision point that was made at such a level that you don't even think of it as affecting much of your life. Boy, does it have a big effect. So these deep intentions that we live our lives according to change everything. So that's a huge thing. And so it would even change, because you might say, like, well, he didn't really set out to have a weird experience in Ravenna. No, but I think he wanted to have an initiatory experience of consciousness. And I think, oh, because that would be a preset in his intentionality. And I've got those too. I think most of us have those. But I think that's sort of answering that first question. But I love your other question. I do want to address it too about timeline pruning.
Yes, yeah, because you have a very, and since I've heard you speak about pruning lower timelines, I have adopted this as well because I think it's so important. So I would really love for you to share how you try to kind of cultivate the highest timeline for yourself.
Yeah. Well, first I'll go a little into what it is and why, and a little background and like why do I care so much about that? And I'll describe what it is. Okay, so timelines are like a tree. If you think of a tree with the branches being the future and the roots being the past, sort of I'm doing the hand thing, branches and roots. So if you're growing a bonsai tree, I love miniatures, and if you're growing a tiny little tree, which I don't have, but they're cute, they're a lot of work. But if you have such a thing, you're going to need to care for it regularly. You're going to need to tend to its roots, to prune its roots. And so you remove it from the dirt and you're pruning its little roots. Those are its connections to the soil. And you'd also want to prune its branches. And then you place it back in its little pot. To me, this is very similar to, I feel tiny in my little human body. I don't know about you, but I feel like I'm so much bigger than fits in myself.
Yes, yes.
And sometimes I'll wake up and I'll just have a feeling like I feel kind of different today. It's kind of exciting. I feel like there's a version of me that doesn't get out much. And now it's like, yay, I'm here. So I can just live a regular life and I don't need to travel. I don't get bored because to me, every day is like, whoa, which is kind of bizarre. Okay, so there's that fun aspect of it. And you might still wonder, well, why do I care about pruning it? Okay, well, remember, in a tiny little body, so I want to make the best of it and the most of it. And okay, and then the other thing is I do life coaching and I'm working with people. Plus, I write books and I have a website and I'm an influencer, perhaps more than I realize. So I do know that if I'm suffering, let's put it that way, from negative thoughts, negative feelings, there's a higher likelihood I'll be inadvertently passing that on without meaning to all kinds of people. And I sure don't want to be any part of that. So that was the huge motivation, is recognizing that these kind of negative thought forms, and here's an easy way to think of them. They're kind of, if you look at the 7 deadly sins, which would be sloth and envy and pride and vanity and greed and lust. I can't remember them all, but you get the idea. When I look at those, it's like, hey, there's a short list of what not to do.
Yeah.
And it's not just what not to do, but it's how about if I prune my tree so that there's no more activation signal from any of these. They look like dead ends to me. And you might wonder, why are they dead ends? Well, some are more obvious perhaps than others. And so I think we have blind spots to the ones that we have weaknesses for. So you might think, what's wrong with pride? I do a good job. Well, some people say that's the worst of all of that. Excuse me to laugh, but that could be the worst. So maybe it's always better to be humble and to always recognize, there by the grace of God go I. That could be me, whoever it is, so that you're never better than someone. Instead, you have that humility built right in. To me, that seems like a good one. So I definitely want to prune any timelines that have any signal or any temptation to fall into pride. Like, oh, look how great I am. I don't want any part of that. So I just prune that right off. And similarly, you can do that with any temptation for greed. And you might think, what's wrong with money? Money's good. Sure it is. Greed's different. Each of these has an energy. And if you start tuning into the energy behind them, you'll notice, oh, wait a minute. I don't want that. Right. That's what we're talking about. It's like, it's when greed just sort of just grabs hold of you. Like, it's like an addiction. These 7 deadly sins, and there are hundreds of analogous Buddhist torments. You can trim those too. Just anything that looks like Buddhist torments and deadly sins. Like, okay, I don't want any activators that trigger into those areas. I don't want to be lazy with sloth. I don't want to be vain and all stuck up on having to look perfect or appear to be perfect or anything like that. So that was what I was doing. And what I find is that it's much easier for me to be unafflicted by news events, much more so than I would be otherwise. Obviously, if I hear bad news, I'll feel terrible about whatever bad news of the day I might hear. But it's not going to grab me and get me all caught up in drama the way that it might otherwise have done if I was feeling outraged, by things, or feeling terrified, or just falling into, you know, a feeling of being victimized. So those are indicators of a drama triangle, which I also make sure to clear so that I'm not getting stuck. Emotions are fine. I can feel frightened. I can feel sad. I can feel angry, but those need to pass instead of me locking onto them and playing a very inadvertent role in making the drama worse on planet Earth. So much better just to be a gentle presence.
Right. And so from a practical perspective of this pruning, is it when, like, first of all, starting with the awareness of, okay, I want to, limit my interactions with these types of, let's say the seven deadly sins or these potentialities for expressions of myself, and then recognizing as they're coming in, as the opportunities are coming in, or is it even more kind of quantum than that, like less practical?
I do a lot of background work, so a lot of my how good can it get is a starting the starting position, because I know that chaos theory and quantum theory go together, and it's all about the starting conditions. So these first initial conditions of what if I wish the best for all concerned, which I do. And what if I've been wishing that as my birthday wish every day? I've had a birthday since I was 10, and then every day, always, which I do. That changes everything. It literally, you may not see it right away, but it's going to have a very powerful effect. So I'm not just wishing how good can it get for me personally. It's really how God can it get. It's like how can this goodness, which is the preeminent goodness from the source consciousness, be felt everywhere? How can I see that it's only ever just me and God? How God can I get? So I'm calling it in. It's a very deep thing. And then the pruning is just an awareness, like, okay, I've got some vulnerabilities. I'm human. So apparently I've sometimes occasionally believed when people told me, you got to hurry, you got to rush, you got to do this before someone beats you to it or something. That's crazy. But I did actually used to fall into a fearfulness about that. Or I think people would be bored with what I'm doing, or what I'm doing doesn't matter. Just lots of things that are very subtle, but I can see those are pruning points that should not be affecting me one way or the other. So I just prune those off. And I can, if on a practical side, and here this may sound weird, but I can feel the presence of what you might call angels or demons. And you can think of them as thought forms too. You can just say, like, okay, I'm feeling and what is the difference between the two? Huge. It's enormous. Angels are basically always smiling, like, she's got this. If she needs help, she would ask, and she's not asking. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Okay. Demons are just, let's make a deal. You look like you're suffering. In fact, let's push all your buttons at once to make sure you're suffering. Oh, you're suffering. You're really suffering. How now the only way through it is you got to do this one thing, or let's make a deal, or all these other little things. And those are thought forms engaging. When I've done a good job trimming my tree so that there's no activation point for greed or envy or any of that stuff, pride, then they don't have an activation point. And then I can just quietly ask, how good can it get? Yes, I do need assistance, as always. If I'm in a physical body, I need help. I know I need to keep asking. I'm asking. Thank you for showing me how good this today can get for all concerned. Because that's really what I'm wishing. And for me, the deep, deep, deep work is very powerful, and it has a long-term and a lasting and a transformative effect. But you can also try this on a smaller scale, just for one day at a time. That's what I would do if I was new to this. I'd say, well, this could be crazy. This could go in a bad direction. Let's just try a little bit. So I'll just try pruning a branch or two. Like, I don't want to be an evil version of Cynthia, so I'll just prune the evilness off, and I'll say, okay, ultimate goodness and source and oneness and creator, please make sure that evil version of Cynthia never manifests in the world. So that would be something that you can do. And it helps to have that spiritual grounding.
Yes. Well, I love what you talked about in the beginning of that too, where you just recognizing the the power that you have in the life that you've built, the life that you've created, and the connector points. You have a lot of connector points. You have a lot of influence. A lot of people read your books. A lot of people connect with your content, and it goes back through the past for several years. So from the quantum perspective, you have this like invisible to humans, like connection that it really is reflective of, if you let yourself spiral down, all of those connector points move with you in your creation. But there are seemingly external to yourself points in that reflection of you in your creation. So I would be seemingly outside of you, and however connected we are, it from a quantum perspective can affect me too. But likewise, as you lift yourself and you let that God light in, you're lighting yourself up, and then because we're connected, I'm getting lit up too. And it's just this beautiful, beautiful thing. But it's amazing that, it's just a beautiful opportunity for us all to recognize the responsibility that we have, the opportunity that we have as individuals, but also by virtue of the fact that we're all connected, we're lifting even just through the act of wanting to improve ourselves.
Yes, we really are. And it's so wonderful to recognize that. And I think people who have those near-death experiences, that's an exceptional human experience. And then they get to see quite often that ripple effect that's happened, where just small things they said totally encouraged a child whose whole life was transformed for the better because of those kind words that one person said. Just that adult that took a moment to sit down and review something and show such respect and reverence in that moment for a child who might feel like nobody cared. That can totally change everything. And then in that near-death experience, to be able to live it from that other person's perspective, it's like, oh, wow. So for those of us who've had that kind of feeling, like, oh, that's what happens for sure, then it just gives you extra motivation to, okay, I'll do my best to be a positive influence. I'm not perfect. I know I'm not, most of us, if we're boots on the ground, we're going to make some stumbles, of course, step in the mud, trip, all that. It happens. But the point is, keep asking, how good can I get? How much of a good influence can we all be with our speech, our words, and our energy, and just the way that we're choosing? We might think it's invisible. It's not invisible. Everybody's benefiting when we make small changes on the inside for ourselves.
Right. That's so beautiful. I know we need to wrap up soon. I do want to share just one of the many, many synchronicities, but just to reemphasize, like the magic, there's so much information in the books, but it really goes beyond information, and they're very activating. One of the fun, they were all so fun. One turn after another, where I was like, I just read this, and now this other thing is showing up in outside of the book, where now my husband's talking about this tea house that Cynthia was just writing about, and she wrote this book years ago, and so forth. But and it's in Colorado, and I live in Indiana, and anyway. But one that was so striking was, you wrote in the Mandela Effect and its society about the Hopi. There's a Hopi, I don't even know what you would call it, not a legend, but like let's just say a Hopi legend, but like their origin story, but even, not the beginning, I guess, but that they were guided out of danger to migrate to another place. And the way that you wrote it was, they were guided by a strange cloud during the day and a bright star at night. And as I was reading this, there was like kind of a lot of background noise going on while I was reading it, and as I'm reading it, it sort of felt like it came out of nowhere. From my perspective, it was like, oh, all of a sudden now I'm reading about the Hopi, and I'd never heard this before. This, that they migrated and they were following this cloud and this bright star, and I kind of didn't get it right away. It was one of those like, should I go back and read that again? Because I don't quite understand what it's saying, but I decided to just keep going. And I was like, I think it'll make more sense as I keep reading. So that very day, that was maybe in the early afternoon, that early evening, I do a Gaia trial. There's a TV streaming service here in America called Gaia, and it's got all kinds of like spiritual and supernatural content. And I have never streamed it before. And so I start the trial, like it's day one of the trial. I'm not familiar with the platform. I don't know what show I want to watch. I pick something seemingly out of the air, and it was called Alien Chronicles, and it had something about Antarctica in it. Nothing about indigenous people. It's aliens and Antarctica. And about 3/4 of the way in, out of nowhere, seemingly, again, just like, why are they talking about the Hopi? And they start talking about the Hopi being led to safety by a strange cloud at night, during the day, and a bright star at night. And I could not believe, like 3 or 4 hours after I had read that, and I've never read that before. But anyway, that's just one example of the portals that were open for me personally through interacting with your work, which I found just so fun and so illuminating, and it's a mysterious world.
It really is. I'm so glad you mentioned that. And to me, it's clear what the connection would be with the Antarctica and the ET and the Hopi, because especially that particular story, because they're talking about going from the third world to this current fourth world. And now a lot of people feel the importance of Antarctica, of course, has to do with these cycles of like the end of one world and the beginning of the next. And the Hopi talk about the twins at the poles of the planet, and they're holding it together, keeping it the magnetic north and magnetic south. But if they go on the move, then of course we go from one world to the next. And a lot of people notice it looks like we're about ready to be moving from the fourth world to the fifth, and all the signs are there. And so I did definitely include it in my book because, and it ties in with the ET topic and the cataclysmic apocalyptic topic, because to me, what is the toolkit that we've been given to be able to make this the best possible transition from the fourth to the fifth world? The answer is we're given this possibility and the capability to collectively create, our own reality through the observation of it. And so that's where the Mandela Effect becomes awakening from me to we. So we're not just programming a parking spot for me, but we're programming a best possible landing into the fifth world for all of us. And so that's, of course, why I'm including it in my book. And I can see why a documentary about Antarctica and ETs would want to include that, because they want people to know, don't worry, if and when this starts happening, you'll be guided. Don't worry, don't be afraid. Remember what we're talking about today, Kara and Cynthia, on this show. We're talking about we have within us the ability to look at something and select something completely different. A flat tire can be fine, just fine. It can be the best tire ever. This transition from the fourth world to the fifth doesn't need to be a cataclysmic flood. It doesn't need to be the bright flash with, power outages and all our technology gone. Cancel. Is it possible for us to be humble, generous, all the opposites of the 7 deadly sins? Yes. Is it possible for us to be guided by our star family to safety? Those who have this technology that they've been sharing with us that our government has kept secret from us with, secret physics and so forth, where they've concealed it. Yes, it's possible to be assisted by our star family. We are at all times. But I'm not getting into all that in my book. And I'm just telling you, if you wonder, why are the Hopi in both of these? I'm just saying that's why.
Yes. Yeah, it did become clear, but it was such a fun, just from my own reflection of like, I think it actually like made it more poignant, the fact that I wasn't quite grasping it when I was reading it, because it stuck out. It was just like, wait, should I go back and read this? And then to come across it again in such short order, it was like, there is just one thing happening here, and it is just a phenomenal design, just brilliant.
Yeah, we are part of that brilliance. That's the true brilliance. I'm getting goosebumps right now. I hope everybody is.
Me too. Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
So beautiful.
Wow. Yes. Well, Cynthia, I want to respect your time, and I know we're coming up to the end of the top of the hour, but thank you so much. How can people connect with your work and find these books that are going to open portals for them?
Yes. Well, you mentioned Gaia, and I've been interviewed on Open Minds with Regina Meredith a bunch of times, like a half dozen times, and I'm in a couple of documentaries there. It's the Enlightenment one and the Quantum Jumping one. So I'm just mentioning that because shout out to Gaia.
Yes.
Thank you. I've got my website, of course, realityshifters.com, and that's a good place to find out about my books, meditation CD, monthly newsletter, which goes out currently on Substack, but every single issue is right there on my realityshifters.com website. If you want to catch up with everything that's happened so far, you can. And then I've got a YouTube channel, and I've also got a presence on Facebook and Twitter, or X now, LinkedIn, MeWe, Blue Sky, Alignable. So I'm in a lot of different places, but I think the best is my website. And then I've also got another website. I haven't talked about it here today, but big shout out for my 501c3 nonprofit called the International Mandela Effect Conference. And we do an annual in-person conference. We haven't set the date and place yet for this year. Last year it was in Nashville, Tennessee in November. And the year before that it was in Branford, Connecticut. And then every month we do live streams. So the website to catch up on what we're doing there would be imec.world, WORLD. And I'm on the board of directors there. We also choose the Golden Mandy winner each year for who's been the most influential with the Mandela Effect. At last year's conference, we had a PhD who just got his PhD in the Mandela Effect.
No
And he presented his research. And all the talks are on our YouTube channel, so you can check that out there. But you'd see that if you go to my website and subscribe to my newsletter. All this is covered. So that would be the central location, realityshifters.com.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much. This has been just as amazing as I was hoping it was going to be. So thank you so much for your presence and everything that you're doing to uplift humanity. It's been a joy and an honor.
Thank you, Kara. Likewise.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Soul Elevation. Please take a moment to think about someone in your life who might be uplifted or have their curiosity sparked by this content, and send it on to them. Let's keep sharing high frequency, empowering content to reinforce the highest potential for humanity. I also invite you to subscribe to this content. Thank you for your support, and I'll see you for the next episode of Soul Elevation.